What would make one of the most famous athletes in the world secretly follow one of his employees? This isn't a story about basketball. It's a story about a quiet woman, hidden struggles, and a powerful act of humanity that no one saw coming. Shaquille O'Neal thought he knew every face in his home. But one rainy afternoon, a single sentence from a housekeeper changed everything, and what he discovered after that would break his heart and restore his faith. If stories like this matter to you, stories about dignity, empathy, and unexpected acts of justice, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep sharing what really matters. Where are you watching this video from? We love hearing from you and always read every message. In the grand halls of Shaquille O'Neal's Atlanta estate, where laughter often echoed and sunlight spilled through vast windows, there was one presence that moved silently through the noise. Her name was Marissa Cole. Early 40s, thin frame, always in the same worn-out grey hoodie and sneakers that had clearly seen better days. She never tried to draw attention. In fact, she seemed to shrink from it. Each morning, before the kitchen staff had even turned on the coffee machines, Marissa was already there, wiping windowsills, folding towels with military precision, scrubbing baseboards that no one would ever inspect. Shaq noticed it, not at first, but slowly. Her rhythm was different. Unbothered by the chaos of the household, she moved like a ghost with purpose. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when she did, her voice was soft and direct. "Yes, sir." "No, ma'am. I'll handle it." That was it. There was a strength in her silence that intrigued Shaq. While others made jokes or tried to impress him with compliments, she never tried to be seen. She just did her job, consistently, precisely, and with a kind of invisible dignity. One thing stood out more than her silence: her exhaustion. It clung to her shoulders like an invisible backpack. There were dark circles under her eyes that not even the early morning light could soften. Her hands, though steady, looked cracked and rough, always hidden behind gloves even when the job didn't require them. Shaq, known for his easygoing nature and attention to detail, began noticing more than just her cleaning. He noticed how she always left last, even when she finished early. How she never touched the lunch prepared for staff. How she politely declined a seat in the lounge, choosing instead to sit alone on the back steps, sipping water from a bottle she refilled daily. Something about Marissa didn't sit right with him, not in a bad way, but in a way that made his chest tighten. He didn't know her story yet, but deep down he knew there was one, and it wasn't a happy one. Not yet. It was a rainy Wednesday, when the first real crack in Marissa's armor revealed itself. Shaq had just finished a conference call and was walking past the side entrance when he overheard a brief exchange. Another staff member offered Marissa an Uber ride. The sky was pouring, and her hoodie was already soaked. She declined with a gentle shake of her head and said, "I need every dollar I can save." Then she walked off into the rain. That one sentence hit harder than expected. Shaq stood frozen for a second, umbrella in hand, but forgot to open it. "I need every dollar I can save." It repeated in his mind like a song stuck on loop. This wasn't someone being frugal. This was someone surviving. The mansion, with its marble floors and heated towel racks, suddenly felt colder. He watched her walk across the slick pavement, her sneakers making that wet slap sound only cheap, overused shoes make. She held her bag close to her chest, as if protecting more than just belongings, like there was something fragile inside. The wind pushed at her, but she kept going. No complaint, no drama, just quiet resilience. That night, Shaq barely touched his dinner. Something gnawed at him, not guilt exactly, but a growing discomfort. He had always prided himself on being aware, on taking care of those around him. So how had this gone unnoticed for so long? A woman under his roof, showing up every day with grit and grace, yet struggling this much? He found himself replaying small moments in his mind. The time she declined a staff lunch. The time she limped briefly but kept going. The way she always wore long sleeves, even in heat. None of it had registered until now. She had built her invisibility with such care it was almost a skill. And he had fallen for it, just like everyone else. But now he couldn't unsee it. The illusion was broken. And once you notice someone's pain, it becomes your responsibility, even if they never asked for help. The next morning, Shaq did something he hadn't done in years. He asked his driver to quietly follow someone. It felt strange, borderline intrusive, but something inside him insisted. He waited until Marissa clocked out and slipped into an old shuttle van that served the outer neighborhoods. It wasn't marked, just a faded white vehicle with a dented side panel and a license plate barely hanging on. They kept a few cars behind, moving slowly through the Atlanta traffic until the city skyline gave way to rusted fencing, old train tracks, and shuttered convenience stores. The roads narrowed. Trees became more frequent, but so did the potholes. Eventually, the van turned off the main road onto a winding path with cracked asphalt and fading paint lines. That's when the air changed, quieter, heavier. The van stopped at a forgotten corner of the map, a trailer park hidden between a warehouse district and a stretch of woods. No sign, no lights, just a leaning row of trailers surrounded by weeds and mud. One of them had a broken porch and a child's tricycle half submerged in dirt. That's where she got off. Shaq watched from inside the SUV. Marissa stepped off the van carrying 2 heavy grocery bags and what looked like a small pink lunchbox. The rain had started again and she didn't rush. She walked through ankle-deep mud like she was used to it, like she didn't even notice. When she reached her trailer, she paused just long enough to fix a piece of cardboard flapping in the wind, then slipped inside. No lights turned on. The whole trailer leaned slightly to one side. The metal was rusted. One of the windows was covered in plastic. Shaq's fists clenched on his lap. This woman, who moved through his marble-floored home with quiet discipline, was going home to this, to darkness and cardboard insulation. He didn't speak during the drive back, and his driver didn't ask questions, but in the silence of the car, something shifted in Shaq's heart, a promise forming before words could shape it. He had seen too much now. Ignoring it wasn't an option anymore. The next day, Shaq couldn't stop thinking about that trailer. He pulled up satellite images, blurry and outdated. He sketched the layout from memory, that crooked porch, the sagging roof, the soggy patch of grass that wasn't grass at all, just mud. There was a heaviness in his chest that hadn't lifted since the night before. He had seen poverty growing up, but this was different. This was invisible poverty, the kind that doesn't scream but whispers in silence. He drove back alone that evening, parking a block away, wearing a hoodie pulled low over his face. He just needed to see more. As the sun dipped behind the trees, he saw Marissa step outside with a trash bag. Her sleeves were rolled, revealing arms covered in tiny chemical burns. She moved quickly, then paused to help a neighbor's child whose bike chain had slipped. No hesitation, just a quick, kind smile and a steady hand. Then she went back inside. Shaq watched for 30 minutes. No light ever turned on. He wondered if the electricity had been cut. There were no sounds of a TV, no humming fridge, just silence, and the occasional bark of a dog far off in the woods. He imagined the children, Jalen, Noah, and Chloe, tucked inside, maybe reading by flashlight or sleeping early to avoid the cold. There was no sign of luxury, not even comfort, just survival. A worn-down woman with too much on her shoulders and too little to lean on. And yet, she hadn't missed a single day of work, had never shown up late, had never once asked for help. It wasn't pride. It was purpose. She was holding everything together by sheer will. Back at his mansion, Shaq stood in front of his walk-in pantry, lined with snacks and protein bars. He didn't touch anything. He thought about the cardboard paneling, about the girl's lunchbox, about how many miles Marissa walked every day, not just on her feet but in her spirit, carrying trauma, grief, duty, alone. That night, he didn't sleep again. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a champion. Not when a quiet hero was fighting battles under his roof and no one had bothered to see it. Back at the mansion the next morning, everything looked the same, but Shaq wasn't seeing it the same way. The gold accents, the polished surfaces, the staff moving like clockwork, it all felt distant. His attention stayed fixed on Marissa. She moved just as before, efficient and quiet. But now he could see what was underneath. The strain in her posture, the way she stretched her back when no one was watching, the slight limp that came and went. That afternoon, as she bent under the dining table to polish its carved wooden legs, he noticed her wince. Just for a second. "You all right?" he asked gently. She straightened up, startled, then smiled, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Always blessed," she replied. Her voice didn't tremble, but her eyes told a different story. It wasn't a lie. It was faith. The kind you build when there's nothing else to hold on to. Shaq nodded, but his thoughts spiraled. He had known many people in pain. Athletes pushing through injuries, friends hiding losses. But this was different. This was a pain that had no audience, no glory, no end date. It was the pain of responsibility, of invisible labor, of making miracles happen daily just to stay afloat. That night he tried searching her name online. Nothing came up, no photos, no posts, no stories. It was like she didn't exist digitally. No complaints filed, no recognition earned, just a blank slate, as if her whole identity was wrapped in what she did for others, never for herself. It made him feel ashamed. In all his fame, how had he missed the quiet greatness in front of him? He looked around his home, the custom furniture, the trophy cases, the 100-inch TV, and realized that everything he had worked for now felt hollow compared to the resilience of a woman earning less than $2,000 a month, raising 3 children alone, and still saying she was blessed. He couldn't stop replaying. Haying, that word. Blessed. It haunted him. Shaq had built an empire with, if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, stories about quiet strength, unseen struggles, and the power of doing what's right, then subscribe to this channel. We share real stories with real heart. Stories that restore faith in humanity. Shaq didn't want to invade Marissa's privacy, but he needed answers, not out of curiosity but out of responsibility. So he quietly asked one of his longtime assistants, someone discreet and trustworthy, to look into whatever public records were available. "Just the basics," he said. "I want to understand her world." What came back wasn't a scandal or a secret. It was something far more powerful, a story of pure survival. Marissa Cole, 43 years old, widow, mother of 3. Her husband, James, had died in a warehouse fire 5 years ago, an electrical short, late at night. He had stayed overtime to cover another worker's shift. Since that night, Marissa had held 2 jobs. During the day, she cleaned luxury homes. At night, she cleaned office buildings downtown. Most weeks, she slept less than 5 hours a night. Her kids, Jalen, 12, Noah, 8, and Chloe, 5, were all enrolled in underfunded schools near the trailer park. Jalen, the eldest, had missed several months after his father's death to help his mother care for the others. Marissa had once been enrolled in nursing school, but dropped out just 3 semesters shy of graduation. Tuition became impossible after the funeral expenses drained her savings. What struck Shaq most wasn't the tragedy. It was how invisible it had all been. No complaints, no asking for help, no woe is me post online. She had built a wall of dignity so high, even pain couldn't climb over it. Her strength wasn't loud. It was quiet, deliberate, like the way she folded clothes or scrubbed tiles. Every action had weight. Every moment, a choice. The assistant also mentioned something else. Marissa had never missed a rent payment on the trailer, not once in 5 years. Even in the hardest winters, she had kept that roof over her children's heads. Shaq sat in silence as the report was read aloud. A lump formed in his throat. He had met athletes who broke records, CEOs who moved markets, but he'd never met anyone like her. That night, he stood on his balcony, staring out into the dark. Somewhere out there, a woman who made less than $20,000 a year was raising 3 future adults with more love and sacrifice than most millionaires ever would. And no one was clapping for her. No one even knew her name. It was a Thursday evening when everything shifted. Shaq had a cancelled meeting and returned home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, with only the low hum of appliances and the muffled sounds of laundry machines in the distance. He wandered toward the back hallway, drawn by the soft rhythm of folding. There, in the laundry room, he saw her, Marissa, half asleep, sitting on a plastic chair, a towel draped over her lap, her head nodding forward in exhaustion. Her hands were red and cracked, raw from years of chemicals and cold. Her hoodie sleeves were pushed up, revealing tiny bandages on her wrists. One slipper was missing. She had kicked it off without realizing. A half-folded pile of bath towels sat beside her untouched. She looked so small in that moment. Not just tired, depleted. But still, even asleep, her hands rested on the fabric like she was afraid to drop the responsibility. Shaq didn't speak. He stood there for a long time, the image searing into his memory. He had played through injuries. He had collapsed after championships. But he had never seen this kind of fatigue, the kind that wasn't temporary. This wasn't just tiredness. It was life, slowly wearing someone down day by day. Eventually he stepped forward and gently tapped her shoulder. She startled awake and immediately stood up, trying to explain. "I'm so sorry, sir. I was finishing the last load, and I sat down for a second. It won't happen again." Her voice cracked, but not from fear, from shame. The kind of shame that doesn't belong to the guilty, but to the overworked. Shaq placed a hand on her shoulder and said quietly, "You don't need to explain anything." She nodded, eyes lowered, and picked up the towel again, folding it with shaky hands. That night he didn't just lose sleep, he lost patience, with the system, with himself, with the idea that goodness should ever go unrewarded. Something inside him snapped into focus. It wasn't just about doing something kind, it was about doing what was right. And for the first time, he knew exactly what that looked like. The next morning, Shaq asked Marissa to join him in his home office for a quick chat. It wasn't something he normally did with staff, and she clearly felt the weight of it. She knocked lightly before stepping in, her hands clasped, posture straight. "Good morning, Mr. O'Neal," she said, her voice calm but cautious. He smiled, gestured for her to sit. "Just Shaq," he replied. She nodded but didn't relax. He poured her a cup of tea, chamomile he had asked the chef to make it fresh. She hesitated before taking a sip. The silence stretched, not awkward but uncertain. Finally, Shaq leaned forward and said, "I've noticed how hard you work, and how little you ask for in return." Marissa smiled gently. "I'm just grateful to have this job, that's all," she said. It wasn't a line, she meant it. Shaq nodded slowly. "If there's ever anything I can do to make life easier, you just let me know," he offered. For a moment, she looked like she might cry, but instead she straightened her shoulders and gave the same answer she always gave. "I just want to keep this job, that's all." The simplicity of it hurt more than any complaint could have. He studied her face, the tiredness behind her eyes, the small creases of a life lived in quiet fight. He realized then that offering help wasn't enough. Some people are too proud, too conditioned by survival to ever ask. What they need is for someone to act without asking. As she left the office, she thanked him again, and he noticed she clutched her teacup just a second longer than necessary, like it was the only warmth she'd had in days. He watched her walk back down the hallway, the same steady pace, the same quiet grace. But now he saw the weight she carried more clearly than ever. That was the moment the plan began. A real plan, one that wouldn't just offer kindness, but build a bridge to something permanent. Dignity, stability, a future. Shaq didn't wait for permission. The next day, he called his accountant and gave 3 simple instructions. Double Marissa's salary, add full health insurance for her and the kids, and arrange a private car to pick her up and drop her off daily. No more late-night shuttles or walking through rain. When the assistant asked what to tell her, Shaq paused, then said, "Just say it's for safety." That's all. Marissa was confused when the black SUV showed up the next morning. The driver greeted her by name, opened the door, and handed her a note. "For your safety and comfort, please accept this small change." She hesitated for a full minute before getting in. Her hands trembled as she texted her sister, "Did something happen? Why would they do this?" At the mansion, she worked as usual. Nothing changed in her routine. She scrubbed, folded, organized, and cleaned with the same precision. But there was a subtle difference in how she stood. Her shoulders weren't as tight, her movements just a bit slower, more grounded. She didn't smile more. She didn't have to. Something had lifted. Not everything, but enough. When payday came and she saw the new numbers, nearly $4,000 instead of the usual 2, she stood in the staff break room, staring at the slip of paper. For several seconds, she didn't move. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket like it was fragile, like it might vanish if she looked too long. Later that week, she quietly approached Shaq near the back garden. "Sir, I don't know what I did to deserve this, but thank you, truly." He smiled and simply said, "You didn't have to do anything. I just finally opened my eyes." She nodded, speechless. There were tears in her eyes, but she blinked them away and went back to work. Shaq watched her walk away and felt something settle in him. Not pride, something deeper. He hadn't just helped someone. He had seen someone. And that kind of recognition, that's the beginning of change. Shaq knew that while the raise and private car were meaningful, they were just the beginning. He wanted something lasting, something that would outlive the gesture. So he called his mother, Shaquille O'Neal, the strongest woman he had ever known. He told her about Marissa, about the trailer, about the kids. She listened in silence, then said, "If you feel it in your chest, baby, then that's where God's pointing you." Inspired by her words, Shaq reached out to a local non-profit tied to his mother's foundation, one that specialized in building transitional housing for families in need. Within a week, they had identified a small plot of land just 10 miles from his estate, in a quiet neighborhood with better schools and a community park. He made the donation anonymously, under a generic trust. The house would be modest, 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, warm light, a safe backyard. It wasn't about luxury. It was about safety, about dignity. He sat with the architect personally, reviewing the layout. "Make sure the kids have space to breathe, and give the mom a real kitchen. That's where she'll heal," he said. Every detail mattered. He wasn't building a house, he was rewriting a future. Construction began quietly. Shaq never mentioned it to Marissa. He visited the site at night, walking through the frame with a flashlight in hand, imagining where Jalen would do homework, where Chloe might draw on the walls. It became more than a project. It became a promise, a way to restore something life had taken from a woman who never asked for anything. The work moved fast. The crew, paid double, worked weekends. Within 8 weeks, the house had walls, floors, windows, a front porch with a small swing, and a door that didn't creak. Shaq stood there one evening, key in hand, and thought about all the people who had helped him rise. Now it was his turn to pass that on, quietly, without a headline. He didn't want credit, he wanted change. A stable home for someone who had been carrying too much for too long. And above all, he wanted her to know someone saw her. Someone believed she was worth more than the world had given her so far. Marissa thought it was just another workday, a cleaning shift at a new property Shaq had recently acquired. That's how his assistant had phrased it when handing her the schedule. No details, no address until that morning. When the black SUV arrived, the driver gave her a sealed envelope with directions and simply said, "You'll understand soon." She clutched her lunchbox tighter, confused but compliant. The drive took less than 20 minutes. The neighborhood looked nothing like where she lived. Clean sidewalks, kids riding bikes, front yards filled with flowers and laughter. Her breath caught when they pulled up to a cozy 2-bedroom house with a blue door and a small porch swing swaying in the breeze. She didn't move, just stared. It felt like a dream too kind to be trusted. Shaq was already there, leaning against the porch post, dressed in a simple sweatshirt and jeans. No fanfare. No cameras, just him smiling softly. "Come on," he said, extending a hand. She stepped out of the SUV like someone walking into a memory they never thought they'd live. Her feet felt heavy, her chest even heavier. He handed her the key, just a simple silver key on a red ribbon. "This is your new home," he said. "You earned it a long time ago, I just noticed late." For a moment she didn't speak, didn't breathe. She looked from the house to him and back again, her lips trembling. I can't," she whispered. He gently interrupted. "Yes, you can. And you will. Because you deserve more than survival." She fell to her knees, not from shock, but release. Like years of holding everything together had finally broken free. Her hands shook as she covered her face, sobbing silently into the grass. Shaq knelt beside her, placing a strong arm around her shoulders, No words, just presence. The kind of comfort only those who've walked through fire can give. Then came the sound of laughter. Chloe and Noah running through the front door, their tiny feet pounding hardwood floors for the first time in their lives. Jalen stood frozen at the threshold, eyes wide. Shaq placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Your mum's a hero, never forget that." The boy nodded, tears forming, and in that moment the house became a home. Inside the house, the air felt warmer than anything Marissa had breathed in years. She stepped across the hardwood floor barefoot, as if afraid to wake the dream. The walls were painted a soft cream. The kitchen sparkled with new appliances. There were 3 small bedrooms, each with sunlight pouring in and the scent of fresh paint. Chloe ran from room to room shouting, "This one's mine!" Noah laughed so hard he hiccuped. Jalen didn't move right away. He just stood in the doorway, clutching his backpack like a soldier returning from war. His eyes scanned every corner, as if waiting for someone to tell him this was a mistake. Shaq walked over and kneeled next to him. "It's real, kid. No catches, no tricks. This is yours. Because your mum never gave up." Jalen nodded slowly, then let his bag drop with a heavy thud, his first surrender to safety. Marissa sat on the living room floor, surrounded by her children, tears still streaming down her face. But there were no sobs now, just silence. A silence filled with release, gratitude, disbelief. She looked at Shaq, trying to speak, but nothing came. He raised his hand gently. "You don't owe me a thank you. You already paid for this with your strength." The house had no chandelier, no marble counters, no home theater, but it had something more rare. Peace. A sense that, for once, the ground beneath their feet wouldn't shift, that no one would knock on the door with bad news. That warmth didn't have to come from hope alone, but from walls that held you and a roof that didn't leak. Shaq didn't stay long. He didn't want to turn the moment into something public or awkward. He left a small envelope on the kitchen counter with the final paperwork. The deed, the utilities, all handled. No rent, no mortgage. Just a note that read, "For every night you held your family together without help, this is your rest." As he stepped back into the SUV, he glanced once more at the window. Inside, Marissa was sitting at the table with Chloe in her lap, Jalen pouring juice into plastic cups and Noah doing a silly dance. A quiet hero, finally allowed to breathe. And a man who saw her, finally doing what he was always meant to do. The weeks that followed felt like spring after a long winter. For the first time in years, Marissa didn't have to set an alarm for 4:30 a.m. She still woke early, out of habit, but now she sat on her porch with a cup of tea and watched the sun rise instead of racing to beat it. Her hands, once dry and cracked, began to heal. The kids adjusted quickly, almost too quickly, as if joy had just been waiting at the door. Jalen went back to school full-time. His teachers were stunned at how quickly he caught up. He was smart, always had been, but now he had space to think, to dream. Noah, once shy, joined a neighborhood soccer team. Chloe insisted on putting stickers on every surface of her new room, claiming it as her kingdom. Laughter became the most common sound in their home. Marissa, after some encouragement, began taking evening classes online. She sat at the kitchen table with a small lamp, highlighting textbooks and writing notes in the margins. Her dream of nursing school, once buried under bills and grief, began to breathe again. It wasn't about ambition anymore. It was about finishing something she started, for herself and for her kids. Shaq visited once or twice a month, never unannounced. He brought little things, a chessboard for Jalen, a basketball for the backyard, a slow cooker with Lucille's famous recipe inside. He didn't hover. He wasn't trying to be a savior. He was just present. A quiet support system, like a guardian who stepped in only when truly needed. They never talked about the trailer again. It didn't need to be remembered to be honored. It had shaped them. But this chapter wasn't about survival. It was about rebuilding, about legacy. And about what happens when someone with power chooses to uplift instead of overlook. And in the glow of their new life, one thing became clear. Love doesn't always come loudly. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a key, a conversation, or a man who saw what no one else bothered to see. Months later, during a casual interview about philanthropy, a reporter asked Shaq a simple question. "What's the proudest thing you've ever done off the court?" He paused, leaned back, smiled quietly. Then he said, "I was raised by a strong woman. I saw her again in someone who worked for me. I just helped her get the space she always deserved. Greatness isn't in trophies. It's in what you give when no one's watching." The clip barely went viral. It wasn't flashy. There were no photos, no house tours, no emotional montages. Just Shaq, speaking from a place deeper than fame. The people who knew Marissa never saw her name in the headlines. And that was the point. She didn't need the world's eyes, just one person's eyes, seeing clearly for the first time. At home, Marissa never brought it up either. Not with neighbors, not with friends, but her children knew. Jalen kept the house key in his backpack, not because he was afraid of losing it, but because it reminded him of what was possible. Chloe, whenever someone asked who Shaq was, simply said, "That's our friend." The true legacy wasn't in the house or the money. It was in the way Marissa stood taller now, the way she spoke with a little more certainty, the way her children laughed louder. Shaq had given them more than comfort. He had given them a reset, the rarest kind of gift, one without strings. He never asked for loyalty, never demanded praise, and in a world where generosity is often performative, his silence was its own kind of power. He helped because it was right, not because it would trend. And that made all the difference. Legacy, Shaq realized, isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build in someone else that keeps growing long after you're gone. The story never made the tabloids. There were no viral videos, no dramatic news specials, just quiet change unfolding like morning light through a dusty window. But in that forgotten trailer park, whispers began to circulate. "Shaq did something again," someone said at the local laundromat. Another nodded, "For that woman who used to take the bus in the rain." They didn't know the full story. They didn't need to. What mattered was that hope had stopped by. Back in her new neighborhood, Marissa became known for something else entirely. Not for being the woman Shaquille O'Neal helped, but for her smile. For the way she helped new moms find clinics, for how she hosted free tutoring nights in her living room. She had always been a giver. Now she finally had the strength and space to give without losing herself in the process. In a small classroom 2 nights a week, Marissa took notes by hand. Her pen scratched carefully across the page, her eyes bright with purpose. She was older than the other students, but that didn't matter. Every word she wrote was a piece of the future she had once believed was lost. There was no bitterness, only gratitude and fierce determination. Shaq never mentioned her name again in interviews. He didn't need to. The house was never added to his real estate portfolio. It remained quietly in her name, untouched by fanfare. But he did keep one thing from that chapter, a photo Chloe had drawn of him, smiling beside their family with the words, "Thank you for my house," written in crooked pink crayon. It hung inside his office next to his first NBA jersey. In the world of fame and lights, Shaq had learned something profound. Not all heroes wear jerseys. Some wear grey hoodies and fading sneakers. Some fold towels until their fingers crack. Some hold families together with nothing but love and sheer will. And those are the stories that matter most. Because real power isn't loud. Real justice doesn't need applause. And the most lasting legacies are built not with money or fame, but with compassion, seen at just the right moment, by someone who cared enough to look closer. This wasn't just a story about Shaquille O'Neal. It was a story about how real power is quiet, and real heroes don't always wear a jersey. Marissa didn't ask for help. She didn't complain. She simply carried the weight, for her children, for her future, for survival. And because one person finally stopped to look closer, her story changed. Not with headlines, but with dignity. How many people like her walk past us every day, unseen? If this story touched you, leave a comment and share your thoughts, or tell us about someone who inspires you with quiet strength. We want to hear your story too. Hit the like button if you believe the world needs more stories like this, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of justice, transformation, and heart. And in our next video, we'll share another moment where someone underestimated the wrong person and paid the price in a way they never expected.